He says, Sean, could you steel man a naturalistic theory for the historical evidence surrounding Jesus?
Now, you're going to have to help me with the jargon. When you say steel man, does that mean give my best explanation if I was a skeptic of where I would go?
So straw man is when you misrepresent someone, and a steel man is when you make their argument stronger.
Basically. Oh, so he wants my best argument for any naturalistic theory for the resurrection.
Yeah. What's your best attempt?
Okay, here's what's really interesting. I appreciate this question. There's an article in the Christian Research Journal within the past 5 years by Gary Habermas. And he talks about how debates over the resurrection have changed over the past century and a half. He says, you go back to the late 1800s, maybe early 1900s, naturalistic theories were essentially, they went to the wrong tomb. Maybe Jesus didn't die. Maybe it's a myth. He says today, essentially, those have gone by the wayside in most scholarly circles. Rather, the best dismissal is actually what was being brought up earlier by the questioner, more on methodological or worldview issues. So I don't know of any naturalistic hypothesis that can account for all the information as we have it. Now, I would take Peter, and some people say, well, maybe he had a bereavement experience. He was sad, and so he saw Jesus to get over his grief. I don't think that's the best explanation, but I'd be willing to concede, okay, that's possible, but that doesn't account for the rest of the apostles. That doesn't account for Paul. That doesn't account for the empty tomb. Even at its best, it can't explain all the information as we have it. The only explanation that accounts for all the facts is the one that historic Christianity has put forward. So I guess if I was going to steel man a naturalistic explanation, I would either say something like, you know what, it's 2,000 years removed, and we can't trust the way history was recorded. These guys had agenda. The evidence is not high enough. I would either take that position, or I'd simply take a more naturalistic position and just say, we know the supernatural is not real, and try to show some incoherence for the larger theistic worldview. I don't even know if that's the best, but that's probably how I would approach it if I was going to be a skeptic.
On the historical argument, for example, I think it's fairly easy to claim there's a sect of Judaism right now in which there's a small subsection of people who believe that the Lubavitcher Rebbe is still alive. Right? The Lubavitcher Rebbe passed away in the 1990s.
Yes.
And there's still people who treat him as though he is not dead. They call him the Messiah. They think that he was the political Messiah. They have and they still do that 20 years after his death. That's not proof to me that he is actually alive. Some of them claim to have experience. Right. So, especially when you're talking about events 2,000 years ago, if people write that down, I think there's sufficient.
I doubt this man's tomb is empty.
I mean, I haven't dug him up, so I wouldn't know. But the claims, if somebody claimed 2,000 years from now that his tomb was empty, or claimed 70 years from now that his tomb was empty, then
that's an important difference, Ben. The important time gap is not the gap between the events and the present. Good evidence doesn't become bad evidence just because of the lapse of time. The critical event, as you just said, is the time gap between the events and the recording of those events. And in the case of the events of the life of Jesus and his resurrection, that time gap is extraordinarily narrow. We can push back even before the writing of the Gospels and the epistles of Paul by discerning the traditions upon which they relied when they wrote. And some of these go back to within, it's estimated, 5 years after Jesus' crucifixion. I'm thinking of the ones that Paul transmits to the Corinthian church in 1 Corinthians 15. So we're on pretty good ground there in terms of the earliness and the multiplicity of our sources for the life of Jesus.